Part 1 of A Christmas Miscellany 2020. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by David Wales. A Christmas Miscellany 2020 by Various. Part 1. Christmas Eve Polchester Winter Piece in The Old Ladies, 1924, by Hugh Walpole. It was a seasonable Christmas that year. Enough snow fell, then enough frost came, and then the sun shone. If it did not shine, at least it rode a circle of crimson fire through the heavens, and before the frost, but after the slime of preparatory fogs, fragments of its fire splashed the high street and spread in pools across the precinct's floor. As I have intimated in other chronicles, Polchester of the old days was an enclosed town. The Riviera was unknown to it, and the Garden of Allah a dream with Omar. Though London might call to the richer citizens on one occasion or another, at Christmas time everyone stayed at home, and, more wonderful yet to our modern disillusion, enjoyed family parties with Christmas trees, plum puddings, stockings, and the waits invited into the hall. It is not, however, that the weather was any more romantic than that it is today. There were just as many rainy and muggy and foggy and dirty and dismal skies, and Glebeshire, warmer than any other part of the British Isles, has never had an intimate acquaintance with crisp and shining snow. About once in 20 years there are snowfalls, frosts, and blue skies, and how happy then everyone is, and how eagerly everyone hands down the year to an envious posterity. This was such a year, and 10 days before Christmas the frost came and held, the powdered snow remained jeweled and resplendent, the sun looked down from a sky as delicately blue as an eggshell, and laughed to see the fun. And fun there was. Magnet's toy shop in the market cloisters had a Father Christmas, a true and veritable Father Christmas, to be seen with 2 crimson cheeks and long snow-white beard any afternoon between 2 and 4. Jeremy Cole so beheld him, and his sisters Mary and Helen, and the dean's son Ernest, and the Fisher girls, and little Tommy Chowner. He did not say much, but he moved between the dolls and the trains, the balls and the soldiers, as only Santa Claus could move, with an authority, a benignity, a ripe wisdom, that no impostor could have been clever enough to feign. Everyone did their best. In the market-place there was a Punch and Judy with a thick-set, jolly-faced man in charge, and he might have been that very same Garrick, friend of Meredith, whose history has been elsewhere narrated. I don't say he was, and I don't say he wasn't. Halfway up the High Street, Grummage's, the stationers, had a whole Christmas tree in their window. Here was a stumbling block to the whole High Street traffic. It was quite impossible to get any child, any perambulator baby indeed, past that window. It was a tree frosted, colored, and shining, hung about with every glittering bauble, shaped to a perfect pinnacle of exquisite symmetry. But best of all was the window of Hunt and Griffith, the general store. For here, for the first time in Polchester history, was a whole front window given over to pageantry, to none other than the scene in the life of Cinderella, when, despondent beside the fire, she is amazed by the sudden apparition of her pink-hatted godmother. There is the fire, and there Cinderella, there the pots and pans, the brick floor, and the Hugh's kitchen rafters, there the godmother, and there, beyond the snow-lined window-pane, the vision of the gold coach and the snow-white ponies. So great was the confusion outside the window that had this occurred in these traffic-haunted times, the show must have been forbidden, but in those lucky days nobody minded, nobody cared. Let the children have a good time. Christmas comes but once a year, and even Mrs. Sampson, although her neuralgia was at its height, could not but admit that the window made a happy display. The town rang during those days with laughter. Proctor Hill, outside the town, had just enough snow on it to allow of tobogganing, and Paul Fields, having been flooded, gave for a whole wonderful fortnight the most marvellous skating. The town rang with laughter and the ringing of bells. The cathedral let itself go and burst into perpetual peals of merriment, to the great annoyance of late sleepers, dyspeptics, and ruminating essayists. There was fun everywhere, apples and oranges in the marketplace, and carols up and down the streets after dark. It was the best Christmas that Polchester had known for many a day past, or would know for many a day to come. Mrs. Amherst was one who had always enjoyed a seasonable Christmas. To her, as to every old person, Christmas was filled with sad memories, but she had a wonderful gift of enjoying fun at the moment of its occurrence, and being aware that she was so enjoying it, and because the fun in her life had been neither frequent nor extravagant, very small occurrences amused and excited her. This was the happiest Christmas known to her for many a day. Struggle as she might not to think of the money coming to her, she could not keep it out of her consciousness. She told herself again and again, and when she was alone in her room she repeated the words aloud sometimes, that she must not place too strong a reliance on her cousin's promise. He may have altered his mind the next moment. It's silly to believe him. Nevertheless, the solemnity of his words, the caress of his hand as it rested on her head, these things were difficult to dismiss. And the happiness that came from the promise was also difficult to dismiss. She was naturally happy. Give her the least excuse, and she must be happy. Although she believed that God did not intend that human beings should be very happy, because they were in this world for the training of their souls, and souls were better trained by sorrow than by joy, nevertheless an imp of happiness would continue to jump in her heart and stir her little world with his discordant cries of joy. Joy at what? A kindly action, a splash of sun across the street, a barrel organ round the corner, a stained-glass window, an apple, and a piece of cheese. She could not keep down her spirits, as, being a penniless, lonely old widow of over 70, she should. And this Christmas she lost completely her self-control. She adored above everything else in the world the spending of money, perhaps for the very reason that she never had very much to spend. She had never been able to believe that statement often written in the papers that millionaires did not know what to do with their money. Did not know? Why, she could spend £1,000,000 quite easily at Gummidge's alone. But there, the newspapers were never to be trusted. She liked greatly to be given things, but still better was it herself to make presents. The excitement of giving someone something he or she wanted was intense. To watch the opening of the parcel, to see the stare of pleasure and surprise, to hear the exclamation, to feel the affection flowing out. Was there any luxury in life like it? And it was a luxury that of late she had been compelled to deny herself. Last Christmas she had given Agatha Payne half a dozen pocket handkerchiefs, Mrs. Bloxam a piece of ribbon, and her cousin a pocket-book. Worst sorrow of all, it was impossible to send Brand anything. No use to throw parcels out into the void. The best she could do was to write 2 letters, one a month in advance, and this she sent to the only address she had, something in California, and then one on Christmas Eve, such as she had always written to him at Christmas time. This she also sent out to California, but she wrote it because for a moment it brought him closer to her. She felt, with his photograph up there in front of her, as though she had him with her in the room. These were all but poor substitutes for reality, and, cheat ourselves as we may, our subconscious selves refuse to be deceived. Mrs. Amherst knew nothing about her subconscious self, but she did know that after last Christmas she had a miserable sense of inadequacy and frustrated purpose. She had made nobody happy. Even Mrs. Bloxam had disappeared into the intimacies of her family, to emerge 2 days later with a black eye and a bruised cheek. This year she would fling her cap over the mill. She had prospects. She did not face them finally, those prospects, did not take them, hold them in front of her, look them in the eyes, and say to them, as one always ought to do to prospects, "Now, are you sound and healthy? Have you got heart and lungs and legs and arms and a good stiff back?" No, she merely reported on them. She heard that they were good and healthy, and promised very well indeed. Then she went ahead. The plan came to her in the middle of the night, or rather in one of those early morning hours when the first cock crows and the hidden despair raises its abominable head. Lying there in the early morning, she drove her despairs away and considered Miss Beringer. Poor Miss Beringer! What a frightened, nervous, trembling creature she was! She would like to do something for her. She would like well to give her a happy Christmas. And Agatha Payne, too. It was then that the idea came to her. At first she was frightened of it. It would demand energy and persistence. And had she money enough? Money in the future would not do. She examined her purse and found that she had sufficient did she use part of next quarter's rent. She trembled at that, but she was sure that kind Mr. Agnew, when he knew of the promise that her cousin had made to her, would not hesitate to advance her. She trembled. Her heart warned her. Her cheeks were flushed, and she had a guilty air. But she held to her purpose, and once she had begun, she did not look back. Once she had begun, she could not look back. She moved during those frosty, colored days about the town, the very spirit of adventure. She found that she must go quietly. The excitement tired her, and sometimes she would, in a moment, feel so weary that she could not get to the top of the High Street. And on one occasion, when she was at the top, she could not go down again, and had to take refuge in the shop of Mr. Bennet, the grand bookseller. There she sat, greatly alarmed, on a chair in the very middle of the shop, with busts of Byron and Walter Scott looking down on her, and a grand smell of Russian leather and old vellum in her nostrils, and the complete works of George Eliot at her elbow. Old Mr. Bennet was very kind to her, although she told him at once that she was not there to buy anything, and who should come in at that very moment but Archdeacon Brandon himself, magnificent, handsome, superb, ordering somebody on the Psalms, with the air of a king and a conqueror. She looked around her with the hope of seeing some of her husband's plays, and when she did not, would have liked to ask Mr. Bennet whether he kept them in stock, but her courage failed her, and she could only thank him very much, and slip out of the shop as quietly as possible. Fortunately, she did not hear the Archdeacon's question, "And who was that shabby little woman?" He asked out of all kindness, feeling it his duty as the father of the flock to keep his eye upon all the inhabitants of the town. She tried to keep her head about her purchases. She found, as many another has found before and after her, that the best things were always the most expensive. And then, when it came to the central purchase of all, to the core, the heart, the kernel, the pinnacle, the pièce de résistance, the raison d'être, and any other foreign phrase that you prefer, she found that here expense was inevitable. Try as you would, it must cost more than you had supposed. Of course, she only wanted a small one, but even the small ones... And then, at the last, 2 days before Christmas, she found in the marketplace, in a corner behind the old woman under the green umbrella, the very thing, a darling, a perfect specimen, a miracle. And when she inquired of the nice round-faced man whose possession it was, she found that it was only, well, less than the experience of the last 2 days had led her to believe possible, although more, a good deal more, than she had originally intended. She bought it, and ordered that it should be sent to her room, blushing a little in spite of herself as she named the address. She gave her name very carefully, begging him to be watchful that it should not be sent to any other room by mistake, and he promised her, saying that he would himself bring it. He did, in fact, arrive with it when she was there, and she liked him very much, holding him in conversation for quite a while, and then giving him an orange for the baby. After that she guarded her room like a dragoness, and would not allow May Beringer, who was already forming a too constant habit of dropping in, to cross her threshold. Christmas Eve arrived, and Mrs. Amherst, awaking to the inspiring voice of Mrs. Bloxam, was delighted when she discovered how fine and clear it was. No wind, the smoke rising from the chimneys elephant grey against the blue, the thin rind of frost, the sparrows already chattering at her window for their crumbs. After her little midday meal, she sat down to the table, found her paper and envelopes, and wrote to Brand. Her letter was as follows: My dearest darling boy, I must write to you as I always do, although I sadly fear that it will be a long time before you get this letter. The one that I wrote to you a month ago may reach you before Christmas, and I hope it will. This I am writing because it seems as though I am talking to you, and I don't wish to allow Christmas to pass by without having a word with my dear boy. Perhaps you have been writing to me, and still to the old address. I told them at Cheltenham to forward anything on, but they are so stupid at the post office, although, as a matter of fact, I always think it wonderful, considering the sort of postman one sees walking about, that they don't lose more letters than they do. Quite boys some of them are, and they none of them have very intelligent faces, although I dare say they are good men. Well, dearest boy, I try to imagine to myself the kind of Christmas you are having, but it is really difficult for me, because you told me in the last letter I had from you that it was quite hot at Christmas time. That seems to me very strange, and not very nice, I think. Of course, it is often warm here for Christmas. Both last year and the year before that we had rain and muggy weather, but this year it is delightful, with a hard frost and the sun shining, cold and seasonable. It's so pleasant for the children, and more healthy for everybody, I am sure. I am very well in health. That cough I had when I wrote to you last has quite gone away, and I am sure it's those lozenges that I found at Cubitt's. He's our best chemist here in the High Street. If only I could hear that you are quite well and will come home soon for a visit, I would be quite happy. You know, dear boy, I am an old woman now, and can't expect to live forever, so that I do hope you'll be able to come home soon. It's very nice here, and I'm very comfortable. There's something else I'd like to tell you about, but I suppose that I must not just yet, because it isn't quite settled. I think of you so much, and pray for you night and morning. At this time of the year, when God came down to earth and took upon him our flesh and was a little baby in a manger, I think we should all make him feel how thankful we are. I know that he is looking after you, and so I don't worry about you. At least I know that you are warm. You used to be so careless about your underclothing when you were a little boy. My dearest boy, you are always in my thoughts. Your loving mother. She sat for a long time after she had written the letter, with his photograph in front of her. She thought of him in all the ways that she had known him, as a baby at her breast, as a small boy in his first trousers, as a boy going to his first day school, and forgetting her so quickly in the new excitement of other boys and games and masters, as all right and proper boys must do, of course. And then, as he grew, her interest in the strange new personality that developed, as flower from the bud, a personality that was so strange because it was like neither herself nor his father, somebody quite new. And then his growing independence, his chafing at the literary and artistic interests of his father, his desire for the open-air life and complete independence. Then her own strange sympathy with him, and although she loved him so dearly, she understood that he should want to get away and be free. She had felt it herself in her married life, and she realized that he was her own dear son, not by right of the quiet and domestic character that was most obvious in her, but by right of that secret independence and sharpness of judgment that her married life had subdued in her. He left her, and at intervals returned to her. She had been a woman of 40 when she had borne him, and he had been only 27 when she had last seen him, still a boy, although so strong and independent. She looked at the photograph until she seemed to draw him out of the frame, and he came to her and put his arms around her and teased her in the old laughing way that he had always had. But she was not simply a sentimental woman. She was, in fact, scornful of emotion that led to nothing, and so she put the photograph back upon the mantelpiece, put on her bonnet and her coat, and because it was already 3 o'clock and would soon be dusk, hurried off to take her present to her cousin. She summoned all her pluck, standing for a moment on the bridge and watching the river take on its evening color, softly purple under the dark shadow of the rising hills. Then, thinking of the evening that was coming and the fun that it would be, she smiled. Things always turned out better than you expected. The stars that were now breaking into the sky above her head were the eyes of God. She was watched over and cared for and protected. She had no need to fear. The town, as she passed up through the High Street, was bubbling with merriment and gaiety. The shops blazed with lights, the street was crowded, everyone was laughing and happy, hurrying along loaded with parcels, stopping to speak, it seemed, to anyone who was near that they might wish them good luck. This was the world that Mrs. Amherst loved. Why might it not always be like this? She stopped at the Cinderella window. How pretty and touching! She turned round to a stout man beside her and said, "Isn't it pretty?" "Indeed it is, Mum," he answered her, smiling. "My little girl wants to take it home, don't you, Pansy?" And a diminutive child squeaked out, "Yes!" "What a pretty little girl!" said Mrs. Amherst. "Thank you, Mum," answered the fat man. "A Merry Christmas, I'm sure." "And the same to you," said Mrs. Amherst. The rest of the way home seemed easy. Arrived in her room, she set about the development of her plan. She had asked Agatha Payne and May Beringer to come and visit her at 8 o'clock. She had 2 hours for her preparations. The time flashed by, and in a moment it was 7:45. She hurriedly put on her silk dress, hung around her neck her thin gold chain with the locket that held Bran's portrait, brushed her lovely white hair, put on her lace cap, fresh and crisp from the laundry, then her stiff white cuffs. Finished. Completed. She sat down to survey her work. A smile played about her lips. It was the most beautiful thing that she had ever seen in her life. At 8:05 there was a knock on her door, and then another knock. Agatha Payne and May Beringer entered. They stood, bewildered, on the threshold. It was indeed a pretty sight. The curtains were drawn, and the far end of the room was duskily shadowed, but at the fireplace end stood the tree. And what a tree! Of just the right size for the room, it had a shape and symmetry that surely no other tree in all Christmasdom could equal. It tapered gradually with exquisite shape and form to a point that quivered and flickered like a green flame. On the flame sturdily triumphed Father Christmas, diminutive in body, but alive in his smile, his stolidity, his gallant color. It was the color that entranced the eye. Mrs. Amherst had worked with the soul of an artist. She had not overburdened the slender branches. The thin chains of frosted silver that hung from bough to bough seemed of themselves to dance in patterned rhythm. Balls of fire, emerald and ruby, amethyst and crystal, shone in the light of the candles. And at every place color blended with color. The tree was always the tree. The light that flashed from its boughs was not foreign to it, but seemed to be integrally part of its life and history. It had been placed on a long and broad looking-glass, into which it looked down as though into a lake of crystal water. The candles seemed to be the voices of the tree. It was vocal in its pleasure, its sense of fun at its own splendor, its grand surprise that after all it had come off so well. In proportion, in blending of color, in grandeur of spirit, it was the finest tree in England that night. On either side of the tree were 2 tables spread with white cloths. On one table were some parcels beautifully tied with colored ribbons, and on the other sandwiches, a plum cake with white icing, some saffron buns, and a dish of sweets and chocolates. The 2 ladies stood amazed. So pretty was the room with its soft pink colors, its light dim, save for the aureole of golden splendor shed by the tree, so utterly unexpected the display, that words would not come. Only at last May Beringer cried, "Oh, dear, dear me! Dear me!" Both ladies had dressed in their party best. May in her orange silk, that suited her, I fear, not too well, and Agatha in her dark purple, a dress of a fashion now forgotten, too small for her, but that nevertheless, with her black hair finely brushed, her dark eyes flashing, gave her the air of older days, the air that had made Mr. Payne, 35 years ago, call her his gypsy queen. "Oh, I do hope you don't both think me too silly," said Mrs. Amherst, coming forward, "but I simply had to do something this Christmas. We've just done nothing the last 2 Christmases, and it did seem too bad. Don't you think so? I do hope you don't mind." "Mind?" said May Beringer, coming towards the tree and gazing at it with her mouth open like a schoolgirl. "Why, Mrs. Amherst, it's lovely! It's the loveliest thing! Why, I can't speak! I can't indeed! Words won't come! I can't say anything at all!" Agatha Payne was moved more deeply still. The color possessed her, as color always possessed her, coming towards her like a living, breathing person, holding out its arms to her, whispering to her, "You and I, we are the only ones here who understand. I have been waiting for you, and you alone." Indeed, it seemed to her that the tree belonged to her and was hers absolutely. The 2 other women vanished from her consciousness. She could see only the pale golden flame of the candles, so steady, so pure, so dignified, the balls of amethyst and ruby and crystal, as they swung and turned and gleamed so slightly, and yet always with a secret life and purpose of their own. And the deep green of the tree, richly velvet under the light of the candles. She stood absorbed, entranced, waves of sensuous pleasure running through her body. So silent were they both, that after a minute had passed, Mrs. Amherst was alarmed. "I'm so glad you like it," she said, almost timidly. "Shan't we sit down and look at it? I like to think of all the other trees there are to-night in everybody's homes, and the children dancing round them, and the presents." She broke off because a longing for Brand came to her so urgently that it was all she could do not to call out his name. For a moment it seemed to her foolish humbug, sham and ridiculous sentiment that the 3 of them, old, forgotten, not wanted by anybody, should indulge in this display. But looking up at the tree, she was comforted. Anything so beautiful had its own purpose. She had made a beautiful thing. She felt the joy of the Creator in her handiwork. They sat in a row looking at the tree. May Beringer was, all in a moment, voluble. She had so much to tell them, of the trees that she had known, the trees that she had had in her own house, the trees that she and Jane Betts had decorated together, the Christmas festivities that they had had in Exeter. You would think to hear her that Exeter was the centre of all the splendor and gaiety of the world. Oh, she talked and laughed, and was so wildly excited that she nearly cried. Agatha Payne said very little. She only stared and stared at the tree. The next part of the entertainment arrived. Mrs. Amorous picked up the parcels in their lovely white paper and colored ribbon, and, blushing a little, shell pink faintly coloring the ivory of her cheeks, said, "These are little tiny things that I got. You mustn't laugh at me, please, for getting them. I think the chief part of a present is that it should be wrapped up in paper, don't you? But I hope you'll like them." And they did like them. At least May Beringer liked hers. She had a case with 3 pairs of scissors and a book in a purple cover, The Light of Asia, by Sir Edwin Arnold. Agatha Payne said little about hers, only "Thank you, Lucy," in a deep, hoarse-throated murmur. She had a box of colored cottons and a purple blotter. She could not take her eyes away from the tree. Then they cut the cake and ate the sandwiches, and Mrs. Amorous made tea and listened happily, cosily, to May Beringer's reminiscences. How happy it was with the blazing tree, the dim room, the bells pealing beyond the window, the crackling fire. Each old lady forgot the other. They were lost in their own world of remembered and recaptured life, past joys, past sorrows, past desires, past regrets. The clock ticked on, the candles burnt with steady flame, the bells rang out. Gradually Lucy Amorous closed her eyes. She heard May Beringer's voice from a vast distance, then her own, faintly replying, "How curious! Indeed, indeed!" Her head sank upon her breast. May Beringer also, bathed in the warmth of the room, comforted with tea and happiness, closed her eyes. Her head nodded once and twice and thrice. She pulled herself up, stared sharply at Mrs. Amorous, saw 2 Mrs. Amorous, then 3. Her head fell. She also slept. Only Agatha Payne, her dark eyes fixed, sat without moving, staring at the tree. End of Part 1.